Greetings, lovers of lore. Thank you for joining me for the third installment in the Dominaria United storyline. In the previous installment of the story, Karn, Jaya, Jodah, Sten, and Teferi all ended up in a tower in New Argive in lockdown with the Phyrexian, while Ajani was left behind in the previous location. So we continue the story with them locked in this tower with the unknown Phyrexian. Karn is the only one with the ability to unlock this tower, and he will not do so until he is certain that no one in his presence is a Phyrexian, and they've also located this hidden Phyrexian. So Jaya turns to Karn and starts to ask him about the Silex, but all Karn will say is that the Silex is safe. But Jaya isn't really willing to have that. She's a hot-headed mage, so she says, why won't you tell us where it is, right? Now, at this point, Teferi cuts in and says, Karn is the only one among us who's immune to Phyrexian oil. At this point, even planeswalkers are at risk. But Jaya wasn't having it. She's still insulted at this point, going, I'm not a spy, okay? It's safe to tell me. But Sten just looks at her and says, you wouldn't even know if you were a Phyrexian. And Karn interrupts them both to state that he plans to locate and stop Sheoldred, and he's only going to explain everything after the tower has been secured. Jodah had already used a fair bit of his power creating the portal into the tower, and he wearily accepted, saying, you know what, I'm just going to trust you in this case, Karn. Now, but Jaya is still indignant. I shouldn't have to prove myself to you. Jodah says, look, we need to find the Phyrexian. Let's go ahead and split up. So they decide to go into different teams. Jaya and Jodah are going to take the upper floors of the tower. Teferi and Karn will take the lower floors, while Sten is going to go down into the basement, which has the loud boiler room area. So Karn and Teferi head downwards. Karn's having a hard time navigating through this place because it's designed for regular-sized people, and he's almost too heavy for the stairs. He can hear them creaking underneath him. Now, once they get down to the third floor, they find that there is this smear of blood and slime. So they follow the trail. It leads to a door that says Storage Waterworks in big letters on the sign. And on the hinges of the door, there are smears of slime and blood that make it look like the creature slid through a gap in the door. Teferi turns to Karn and says, should we call the others now? And Karn says that might not be wise. At this point, we don't know for certain that the Phyrexian's actually in here. It might be somewhere else. So Teferi agrees and opens the door a little bit cautiously. After nothing happens, he steps in with Karn with the door open wide. At first glance, there is no sign of anything amiss. It's all just a bunch of old pipes and unused shelves. There's no sign of the trail or anything. But Karn insists they do a thorough search of the room. Karn, being big and unwieldy, is forced to duck down, but this time his size actually plays to his advantage, because when he ducks down, he sees that some of the pipes seem to be bleeding, and when he looks, he can see there's actually a Phyrexian flesh chunk that is belching acid out onto the pipes and growing little metallic barbs. So Karn reaches out and crushes it in his gigantic metal fist. A moment later, Teferi calls him over and gestures for him to listen. It turns out that where they were standing, they could hear through the vents, and you were able to hear that Jodah and Jaya were having a conversation. Jodah was saying that he didn't like what's going on, basically explaining that it's not okay for Karn to have them searching for something that they don't fully understand without filling them in with all of the information. And Jaya just laughs back at him. You're just annoyed. He's doing what you always do, assuming you know best. So Karn realized while he's standing there listening to them that the Phyrexian could theoretically be traveling using these vents. That was confirmed when Teferi pointed out that there was a little bit of dripping oil coming from the vent above, and if you looked at the vent below it, it was actually being transformed by the oil, and it was starting to grow little eyes and teeth. But they were distracted from that discovery by the sound of metal claws clicking and skittering above. Karn quickly followed the noise across the room and found another small vent. This one led down, so Karn turned to Teferi. We must head to the second floor. While they were on their way to the stairs, Teferi actually took the time to apologize to Karn for the days of Teferi's youth when Teferi was a complete jerk to Karn, the arty shovelhead days. And if you don't know about those days, Teferi was genuinely awful to Karn, and he delighted in tormenting him. In fact, it's chronicled in another video on this channel called The First Day of Karn's Life Was a Nightmare. So if you want to know what Teferi is apologizing for, you can actually go and watch that video to get a more in-depth explanation. But suffice it to say that Teferi was a young child who was a jerk, right? And as a result, he tortured Karn mentally. So Teferi is showing some character growth and saying, hey, I wish that when I was a kid, I had been smarter. He basically explains that because he has a child now, he's become a father, he's got a wider perspective on life. It's something that happens to a lot of us. We look back at the way we behaved when we were younger and go, you know what? I'm wiser now. I wish I didn't act that way. So Teferi is the bigger man here and decides to just apologize to Karn for that, which is pretty nice considering that Karn's been torturing himself with a bunch of emotional stuff anyhow. So Karn, in a very calculating moment, decided to seize on the conversation and said, thanks, Teferi. I'm glad that I can trust you. So Karn explains, okay, here's where the Silex is located. And he tells them that it's in the false location of Dominaria West. Teferi smiles at him and says, thanks for trusting me, Karn. And they head for the stairs. But before they can get down to the second floor, there's a shout from upstairs. It's Jodah's voice. So they barrel up to the fourth floor and they find him in a small office. And there is a squid-like Phyrexian that has attacked him that he has flung off against the wall. And Jaya is there and she uses her fire magic to blast the Phyrexian. But at the last moment, the Phyrexian splits in two, avoiding the fire. So Jaya concentrates, splitting her fire to chase the Phyrexian and slam into both of them. But again, they split into two and separate out, with all four of them skittering off in different directions. One of them headed for the door, and Karn stomped his giant metal foot down on it. Another one succumbed to a fire blast from Jaya, but two of them managed to get away, seeping into the floor. Jodah, his concern growing, turns to Karn. Please, tell us what your plan is and the Silex location. Teferi, already having been told the location, not knowing it's fake, he seizes up for a moment, not really saying anything, not looking at Karn, just trying to act nonchalant, while Karn turns and says, no. This angers Jodah, but Jaya cuts in. Look, we need a way to locate these Phyrexians. We don't have time for this. And that calms Jodah down enough that he's able to concoct a plan where they can essentially build a magical compass. The idea is that they'll take some of the remaining flesh of the Phyrexian that was left on Karn's foot, and they will cover that entirely in metal. Because you can't come in contact with the Phyrexian flesh without the risk of being corrupted. But Jodah's location magic required the flesh to be nearby. So essentially, they put it in the center of a metallic ball, and Karn makes the functional pieces that they need, including a metallic needle that will point the way. And Jodah casts the magic on the compass that makes it work, and they create multiple of these compasses so that each group that goes off in search of the Phyrexians is able to have their own compass. Now, while Jodah was busy enchanting these compasses, Karn stepped off to the side and created another one of the scrying devices that he used previously. This was a smaller one, and he was using it to scry for a Johnny. And when he did, he was able to find him, and he was fighting against Phyrexians alongside Capuchin knights. Karn quickly turned his scrying to Dominaria West. There were no Phyrexian searchers out there, so if Teferi was actually a Phyrexian agent, he had not yet had time to report back to Sheoldred. His scrying was interrupted by Jaya. What's that? Sten was also very curious. Yeah, what is that? Karn let the scrying glass fall back on the chain on his neck and said, it doesn't matter, we have more important things to deal with. And Jaya agreed and handed him one of the compasses. Karn noticed that the needle moved between two different points, and that happened with every compass. So what they did was they separated again. So they split into different teams this time and went off. Jodah and Teferi went off together to check the upper floors. Jaya and Sten took the lower levels, and Karn took the basement. After they had all departed, and Karn was headed alone down into the basement, he said to himself, will this compass even work if Jodah's been compromised by the Phyrexians? Karn reaches the boiler room, and it's full of crazy noise, as is to be expected from a room like that, full of pipes and steam, right? And all of a sudden, Jodah and Teferi just come bustling into the room, Jodah yelling over the noise about how they have to recalibrate the compasses because they're useless. They can't actually point in the right direction. They're constantly going in all different ways. And a few moments later, Jaya and Sten both arrive, Jaya complaining, these compasses are useless. It just points all over the place. It's not helpful. The conversation about compasses is interrupted when Jodah notices that Jaya is bleeding. Now, Jaya's angry when he points this out. It's no big deal. But Jodah comes back, why didn't you tell us? Jaya says, look, it's just a scrape. I'm not a child. And Jodah says, it's not that simple. What if oil got inside your wound? And Jaya waved that away. It didn't happen. It's not worth worrying about. And this conversation is ended by a sudden boom coming from above as dozens of pipes were slamming into the floor. So Teferi, Sten, and Jaya all head off to investigate. Teferi giving Karn a look that said he'll keep a watch over Jaya just in case, there's some kind of Phyrexian influence. Karn was doubtful that Phyrexian oil could work that quickly, but it's better to be safe than sorry. So Jodah and Karn started to work on the new compass design. Not only did they recalibrate it, but they also included a number of different needles so it would point at all of the different Phyrexian sources nearby. Now, these compasses were only keyed into the particular Phyrexian located in this tower and not Phyrexians overall in general. So as they're working on the compass, Jodah continues to talk to Karn about how Karn should trust him, and Karn allows Jodah to think that he succeeded, ultimately telling Jodah the Silex is located in a warehouse in a Stark. Jodah was pleased by this, and then frowned down at the compass and said, wait, how did I mess this up a second time? These needles are pointing in every direction now. Karn says grimly, you didn't, as a wave of Phyrexians leaped at them from all different directions from the walls and floors. This was a very dangerous situation because Jodah's magic was mostly spent due to the portal that he crafted to get to the tower and the magic he had used to make both sets of compasses. So Karn went on the defense, but there was no way that between the two of them they could stop them all. Jodah was able to use a little bit of magic before they crawled all up over his body and he fell to his knees as they started to bite into him and dig into his flesh. And Karn was pulling the little Phyrexians off of Jodah as fast as he could. But even as he was doing that, he was leaving little barbs. Think about like how a bee leaves its stinger, right? The Phyrexians are leaving little chunks of themselves in Jodah, and those little chunks are growing mouths and chewing on him. Then out of nowhere, the entire room was filled with flames. The Phyrexians were incinerated. The ones on Jodah's skin were bubbling away, while Jodah and Karn felt only a pleasant warmth. Jaya had arrived, and not a second too late. Karn removed the remains of the Phyrexians from Jodah, and then he started to check the walls. There were no signs of how they managed to surround him, but he could see elements of Thran technology threaded all throughout the building and figured that had some connection to it. It was at that moment that he realized, wait, where's Teferi? Was this attack just a distraction? So Jaya and Karn leave to find Teferi, while Sten stays behind to guard Jodah. Karn took the opportunity to compliment Jaya's fire magic, how useful it is when it comes to destroying Phyrexians. At that point, he does what he's done with everyone else and confides in Jaya a false location of the Silex. He tells Jaya that it's located in Sukata. She smiles at him and says, it's good that you told me. You may be immune to Phyrexian influence, but you aren't invincible. What if something happens to you? Karn was taken aback. He hadn't actually considered that fact. His thoughts were interrupted by a shout from Teferi. They ran upstairs to find Teferi pinned to the floor by a Phyrexian monstrosity. Its pincher jammed directly into Teferi's guts. Blood soaked his robes. Karn barreled in, tearing the monstrosity away. But when the Phyrexian was pulled away, it tore some of Teferi's muscle out of his body with it. Jaya incinerated the monstrosity. Joe and Sten then arrived in the room. Clearly they had heard Teferi's cry and hastened their way here, although Sten had to support Jodah. At this point, they start to discuss how the entire tower is Thran. The Phyrexian seems to have merged with it somehow, so they decide they're going to go and check the main Power Stone. So they make their way to the Power Stone, and while they're leaned in checking out the Power Stone housing, Karn takes the opportunity to talk to Sten the same way he's spoken to everyone else, revealing to him that he trusts him and that the location of the Silex, it's on Sarpedia in Trocaire. Sten got a big grin on his face, just like everyone else when Karn said that he trusted them. But there was a big difference this time, because Sten's body whipped open, full of cables and wires and blood and slime and gore. Sten had been a Phyrexian all along, and he cackled, "That is all I needed to know!" And the cables whip out from his body and connect up to the Power Stone and start to drain power from it, while Sten's body locks rigid, his mouth wide open. It didn't take long for Karn to realize that Sten was transmitting the false location back to Sheoldred. Jaya stepped forward to unleash fire upon Sten, but Sten wasn't as immobilized as he seemed, and he sent out a cascading wave of wires that whipped all around Jaya, cutting off her ability to breathe and move, so she started to turn blue very quickly. Teferi struggled to cast a spell to save her, but instead he collapsed, passing out from blood loss. Jodah rushed over, muttering a quick healing spell to bring Teferi from the brink of death and barely keep him alive. While that was happening, Karn had been trying to tear the wires free from Jaya, but he was having no luck. There were just too many of them. So instead, he turned to dismantling Sten. He grabbed the Phyrexian and tore it limb from limb. It didn't take long for Jaya to become free of the wires, at which point she lended her fire magic to the task and burned Sten down into slag. At this point, Karn uses the key he was given by Sten to unlock the tower, and there are waves of noise that come crashing in from all around in the city. Gibbering horror, the noise of more Phyrexians, and it becomes apparent that the entire city may have already been converted. Karn doesn't know how long ago Sten was turned into a Phyrexian, but he does know that Sten was in charge of rooting out the Phyrexian menace in secret, but instead, Sten had been spreading the Phyrexian menace. And now they were here, trapped in this tower, in the heart of a Phyrexian mass. So Karn pulls out the amulet that he can use to summon the Weatherlight and activates the magic. And Shauna's voice comes over saying, "What's going on, Johnny?" And Karn quickly fills her in. "Oh no, this is Karn. We're all here. Teferi is at the edge of death. We need your help as fast as possible." Now, luckily, the Weatherlight is nearby. So she says they won't take long to get there. But that's still fairly nebulous, because what's going on now, Jodah, who is exhausted, Karn and Jaya, all prepared to defend Teferi against unknown waves of Phyrexians until the Weatherlight arrives, and they have no idea how long it's going to take for help to arrive. All right, that ends the third installment of the story. My friends, I hope you are enjoying it as much as I am. If you like what we're doing here, you can support this channel on Patreon or through the channel membership. We will be back with the next installment, so come on back and enjoy that one too. Thanks for coming by, and remember, my friends, lore is life.